Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Before we get into another week of NFL football, we first need to break down what happened in last week's games. So, once again, we're the Sports Ball Network, and here is our NFL Week 11 breakdown. Thursday night kicked off with the effective end of the Cincinnati Bengals season as they fell to the now 8-3 Baltimore Ravens 34-20. The reason why I call this game the end of the Cincinnati Bengals season is because quarterback Joe Burrow suffered a wrist injury and is now out for the year. Speaking of that wrist injury, the Bengals are under investigation for potentially hiding that he was hurt before the game. But for the team and the quarterback, these were two separate injuries and they aren't related. It doesn't really matter. Right now, Cincinnati's reality is that they are 5-5, in last place in a brutal AFC North. They are now going to be starting Jake Browning at quarterback, and given that the AFC is absolutely stacked this year, I can't really see them making the playoffs. They're going to be playing for 2024 at this point, and it's unfortunate because this is a same Cincinnati Bengals team that made the AFC Championship last year. Hopefully, they will be able to bounce back next year, and Joe Burrow will be able to get healthy. Speaking of players' seasons being over, Ravens tight end Mark Andrews also had a pretty brutal season ending injury. He is undergoing surgery for a severe ankle injury that took him out of this game. Hopefully, he's able to recover and come back strong next year. Uh, Baltimore is the number one seed in the AFC right now, though, but that could change. Cleveland, Kansas City are right on their heels, Jacksonville, too. And losing a guy like Mark Andrews is not great. Still, Lamar had a really good game. He threw for 264 yards and two touchdowns, ran for 54. And so long as he is on this team, the Ravens have a chance. But even with this win, the margin for error in Baltimore is too slim. And honestly, they can't slip up anymore this season if they want to not only maintain their hold on the AFC North, but maintain the number one seed in the AFC as well. The other AFC North clash kicked off the 1 p.m. slate of games as the Cleveland Browns starting rookie quarterback Dorian Thompson Robinson managed to squeak out a 13-10 win over the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Browns are 7-3, and this is a Browns team with a top five defense that has outscored the Kansas City Chiefs this year on offense. They're just loaded everywhere. Rookie running back Jerome Ford is doing his best to replace the injured Nick Chubb. Elijah Moore, wide receiver they picked up, is starting to come into his own. He had 6 receptions for 60 yards. They have Amari Cooper. They have great tight end David Njoku. The Browns just have too much talent to fail, and I think they showed that this week. I fully expect this team to be a playoff team, and if Baltimore potentially slips up, they could win their first division title in the AFC North in quite a long time. As for the now 6-4 Steelers, this loss was really crippling, believe it or not. They could not afford to lose this game in a tight AFC and a tight AFC North, especially given how bad their offense has been. And they did. In fact, speaking of that offense, it's been so bad this season that the Pittsburgh Steelers did something that they have never done in their franchise's history. They fired a coach mid-season. That's right, Matt Canada is now on because of this performance against the Browns. And it looks like the Steelers are going to try and make drastic changes that this franchise has never done before in order to remain in a really tight AFC playoff race. Personally, I'm interested to see what the team does, see if they're able to get anything going on offense here. And time will tell on this one. But Pittsburgh really needed this win. They didn't get it, and now they're in a pretty desperate spot as a result. Did anyone expect anything aside from a Dallas blowout victory against the Carolina Panthers? Because I didn't. The Dallas Cowboys moved to 7-3 on the season, blowing out the now 1-9 Carolina Panthers 33-10. Dak Prescott was again really efficient. He threw for 2 touchdowns in this game. Didn't really need to do much. Tony Pollard came back alive. He ran for 61 yards and touchdown on the ground, hauled in 4 receptions for 19 yards. Uh, really, the Dallas offense didn't have a super exceptional performance. Everyone played pretty well, but nobody really stood out, which is a bit strange considering Dallas in these types of games usually puts up monster offensive numbers, but they didn't need to. That's because the defense had a touchdown, fumble recovery, an interception, and 7 sacks, and really did not let Carolina do anything. Narrative of this Dallas Cowboys team has pretty much been the same all season. They are able to beat up on really, really bad teams in an absolutely brutal manner. But when they play good teams, they kind of falter. So it's not surprising to see them beat the Panthers. I imagine they'll beat the Commanders next week as well during the Thanksgiving game. But ultimately, none of that really matters if you can't beat good teams. And from what we've seen from the Cowboys this year, they have not proven that they've been able to do that. This team just feels like a really good wild card team that maybe is not quite ready to get over the hump yet. As for the Panthers, they are one of the worst teams in the league. Uh, we already knew this, though. We expect them to lose this game. Uh, Bryce Young has not developed as we would hope during his rookie year. He did not have a good game against the Cowboys. He threw for 123 yards, touchdown and interception. He lost a fumble. Really wasn't able to do much. And even against a good Dallas team, you would have hoped that the number one overall pick could maybe get something going for Carolina. Uh, I don't know what the Panthers are going to be doing moving forward over the next couple of years to support Bryce Young and see if he is their guy. But at the very least, I would hope that they have a plan in place or are in the middle of forming one. Because if they are not, then the fans in Carolina are going to continue to see play like this going into 2024, which is not a good thing. For Detroit Lions fans, this game was a harkening back to the cardiac cat as the Lions went down early to the Chicago Bears, but were eventually able to manage to mount a comeback, winning 31-26 and moving to 8-2 on the season. This was by far Jared Goff's worst game as a Detroit Lion. He had 3 interceptions, but even so, he was able to battle back in the fourth quarter. He ended up with 236 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 2-point conversion through the air, as well as the victory. So there's that. The running game for Detroit was fine. David Montgomery had 76 yards and a touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs had 36 and a touchdown. Amon-Ra St. Brown continued to dominate. 8 receptions, 77 yards and a touchdown. But Detroit defense was a little bit disappointing. They did end up getting a safety at the end of the game, but that didn't really mean much. They had already won by that point. They only had 2 sacks otherwise. But this is what good teams end up doing. They end up beating bad teams. And even though it was ugly, the Lions were able to do it and get a win. So props to them. As for Chicago, they fell to 3-8. They are on track for 2 top 5 picks, their own as well as Carolina's. More importantly, though, for the Bears, they are finally getting a fair evaluation of Justin Fields, see what he can do. He was not terrible in the area at 169 yards and touchdown, but he was absolutely electric on the ground, 104 yards on 18 carries. And the fact that Chicago was up big early in this game does provide some hope for the fans that in the future, with a little bit more support and a little bit of a better coaching staff around him, Justin Fields could lead this team to victory. But unfortunately for him and the Bears, that was not the case. And even with 3 interceptions and 2 sacks, the defense collapsed at the end, and they lost. So, realistically, for the Bears, what they're going to want to do moving forward is just continuing to evaluate the talent on this roster because in 2024, they have a lot of draft capital and they're going to be making some hard decisions on who they want to keep on this team moving forward in order to best compete. Because at this point, I think we can safely say that the 2023 season in Chicago is all but over. I really can't fathom how the Los Angeles Chargers are going to keep Brandon Staley at the end of the season here. Because they are now 4-6. They fell to the 4-6 Packers 23-20. And at this point, the calls for the much maligned coach to be fired have gotten louder and louder. Justin Herbert once again turned in a fantastic performance. He had 260 yards and 2 touchdowns in the air. He also had several would-be touchdowns dropped in this game. He also ran for 73 yards. He was doing absolutely everything he could to stay in this game. Austin Eckler, 64 yards on the ground, not much through the air, which is a bit surprising. Keenan Allen, of course, 116 yards and a touchdown on 10 receptions. But for the Chargers, this story on why they lost is their defense, which, of course, is Brandon Staley's specialty. Uh, Performances like this are not acceptable for such a talented team. And honestly, I cannot imagine a world in which the Chargers don't change something up by the end of the season. But who knows? Ownership and the team does tend to give coaches a little bit more leeway than they probably should. So if the Chargers do remain somewhat competitive down the stretch, and maybe if they sneak to the wild card, it wouldn't surprise me too much if they don't make any drastic changes. But at this point, a lot of people think they should. And I cannot necessarily disagree with them. For the Packers, they again moved to 4-6. Jordan Love had a fantastic game, 322 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's been hot and cold all season, which is making the evaluation process on whether or not he's Green Bay's future signal caller really hard. I am of the opinion that if the Packers do end up keeping him, they should sign him to a very limited contract, kind of like a prove it deal. They have not gotten a lot of tape on Jordan Love. They haven't really been able to evaluate him much aside from this year. And the future's unknown. So I would play it safe. But then again, Jordan Love has not shown that he's going to be an Aaron Rodgers level guy or is going to really be an elite level quarterback in the league. So they might end up taking a different direction here. Either way, Green Bay has a number of things they can do, not only for this season, but also for 2024. So it's going to be really interesting to follow this team as the season winds down for them and into the offseason. I did not expect the Houston Texans to be as good as they are right now, but they are 6-4 after beating the 2-9 Arizona Cardinals 21-16, and they look like a playoff team. Rookie phenom CJ Stroud threw for 336 yards and 2 touchdowns, and although he had 3 interceptions as well, he was, for the most part, really good on the day. He was not afraid to take shots deep, and even though he made a few mistakes, he bounced right back and led the team to a victory. Devin Singletary continued his solid work on the ground, 22 carries for 112 yards and touchdown on the ground. Rookie wide receiver Tank Dell went off on this game, 8 receptions, 149 yards and a touchdown. And the defense for Houston had an interception, 3 sacks, and only allowed 16 points to a Cardinals team led by dynamic quarterback Kyler Murray. The Texans just are a fun team. They feel like a good team. And even if they are a year or two away, they are showing that as long as they have CJ Stroud under center, they have a chance to win any game, which makes them dangerous. For the 2-9 Cardinals, Kyler Murray in his second game threw for 214 yards and a touchdown, as well as an interception. He ran for 51 and a score on the ground. James Conner was efficient on the ground, 62 yards on 14 carries. Uh, and Green McBride, a tight end, continues to perform well. 5 receptions, 43 yards. The defense, of course, had a great game. 3 interceptions, 4 sacks, just was not enough. The Cardinals showed that they are a frisky team. They have pretty good coaching under Jonathan Gannon, uh, and they are really building a culture for that team that will continue to pay dividends for them in the future, but they just don't have enough this year. The Jacksonville Jaguars bounced back from their humiliating defeat against the 49ers last week by beating up the hapless Tennessee Titans 34-14. Trevor Lawrence had an amazing performance, 4 total touchdowns, 2 on the ground to go along with 17 yards, and 2 in the air to go along with 262 yards. Travis Etienne was perfectly fine on the ground, 14 carries, 52 yards, 3 receptions, 7 yards. Calvin Ridley finally had that big game that we were looking for out of him. Carry for 18 yards and 7 receptions for 103 and 2 touchdowns. The defense also got in on it, did not allow anything. 2 sacks against Will Levis, 2 fumble recoveries, uh, and really it was just an absolute beatdown for a Jacksonville Jaguars team that really needed to bounce back. Now Jacksonville is 7-3. They're a game back from the number 1 seed in the AFC, and they look to firmly be in control of their own playoff destiny. For the Tennessee Titans, rookie quarterback Will Levis had his fair share of struggles, but he was for the most part efficient. 13 of 17 for 158 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he did not look terrible in this game, which really, for a rookie quarterback, is all you can ask for. The defense, though, on the other hand, did not look good at all. Only a single sack, allowing 34 points to the Jaguars. Really, they just got ran over all day. Something else that's concerning for this Titans team is that Derrick Henry was not very efficient. 10 carries for 38 yards. Could this be the beginning of the end of his Tennessee career? He's definitely getting there in age. He's going to be 30 in 2024. The Titans look like they are not going to compete for the next couple of years. And it ultimately wouldn't surprise me if King Henry asks to be traded or wants to move on. Something to monitor there in the future and going into 2024. I think it's a very interesting situation, Tennessee, and one that may end up resolving itself in the offseason. The Dolphins, to me, feel like the AFC version of the Cowboys. A team that is able to beat really bad teams and average teams pretty handily, but is unable to perform against above average and good teams. This was once again the case on Sunday against an average to below average Raiders team. The Dolphins managed to get a 20-13 win, moving to 7-3 on the season. Tua was pretty good. He threw for 325 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did have an interception. The ground game was, for the most part, efficient, with Raheem Mostert running for 86 yards on 22 carries. It was a bit concerning, though, to see rookie running back Devin Achane go down once again with the same knee issue. Reports are saying he's fine, but definitely something to monitor. Tyreek Hill was fantastic. 10 receptions, 146 yards, and a touchdown. Jalen Waddle was disappointing, 4 for 55. It's interesting. He's been mostly disappointing all season. Hasn't really had like a huge game like he did last year. The defense for Miami had 3 interceptions and 2 sacks, and really picked on rookie quarterback Aiden O'Connell. This was a good win by the Dolphins, but again, this was to be expected. They do tend to beat teams like the Raiders. So until we see them do it against an actual good team, uh, this team will continue to be somewhat suspect in my mind, especially going into the playoffs. The Raiders, meanwhile, fell to 5-6. Rookie quarterback Andrew O'Connell, 3 interceptions. Not a good day for him. Uh, did have 271 yards and a touchdown through the air, but that's not enough. Josh Jacobs struggled, only 39 yards on the ground. Uh, the Raiders defense had an interception, had a sack, but was not really able to generate a whole lot. Outside of that, they did have 2 fumbles, but the Dolphins were mostly able to impose their will on them. This Raiders team is below average. We kind of knew this after their really bad start. They did rattle off a couple quality wins once they fired Josh McDaniels, but realistically, in a stacked AFC, no one expected them to really be competing. And that is proving itself to be the case. Going into 2024, I do expect the Raiders to make addressing their quarterback room a priority. And ultimately, I wouldn't be surprised if they move up in the draft in order to do so, especially considering at this point their record is too good to land one of the top prospects, but is not good enough where they'll make the playoffs. They're kind of stuck in a limbo, and they really, really need to change that. It's hard to believe that we would see a game with the defensive performance worse than the Broncos when they gave up 70 points to the Dolphins. But I believe the Washington Commanders giving up 31 points to a Tommy DeVito led New York Giants team in a 31-19 loss might actually be just that. Yes, I know Washington had 9 sacks against New York's turnstile of an offensive line, but they also gave up 31 points to a Tommy DeVito led New York Giants offense. That's just not acceptable. Tommy DeVito is quite literally a third string quarterback that New York pulled up like 3 weeks ago, and the fact that he is able to pretty much dominate your defense just kind of shows that you really need to make some changes. Uh, Washington has pretty much squandered this season and pretty good quarterback play from Sam Howell. So I would not be too surprised if they end up moving in a different direction next season with their coaching and potentially look to get the young quarterback more support moving forward. As for the New York Giants, they do move to 3-8. Tommy DeVito threw 3 touchdowns, 246 yards. He was pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. Uh, and really, for someone who quite literally came up onto the roster from essentially nowhere, he's played pretty well. Saquon, 83 yards on the ground, 57 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns. Darius Slayton, 4 receptions, 82 yards, and a touchdown. The New York Giants defense, 3 interceptions, 4 sacks. Uh, we have seen moments this season that kind of shows what the Giants could have been and what they were last year. But realistically, the Giants aren't a good team right now. They're still in the rebuild phase. And I would not expect much else from them this season, but it is encouraging to see these types of games, these types of performances, and it builds hope and expectations for the future moving forward. Kicking off the afternoon games, the San Francisco 49ers ended up beating the frisky Tampa Bay Buccaneers 27-14. Brock Purdy has fully recovered from his concussions and injuries. He threw for 333 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He was great. Christian McCaffrey, 78 yards on the ground, 25 and a touchdown through the air. He was doing his usual thing. Brandon Ayuk, 5 receptions, 156 yards and a touchdown. George Kittle, 8 receptions, 89 yards and touchdown. The defense, an interception and 4 sacks. Just a great all-around performance from a great San Francisco 49ers team, but we expected this from them. For the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield threw for 246 yards and a touchdown as well as an interception. Rashad White, 30 yards on the ground and a touchdown, 6 receptions, 28 yards through the air. Mike Evans continues to have a good season, 5 for 43 and a touchdown. But ultimately, Tampa Bay did not have enough to win this game. But we expected this. Tampa Bay was not seen as a great team going into the season. And although they have surprised a lot of people, no one would have realistically expected them to beat a team like the 49ers. They still need a couple more pieces to get to that level. But again, games like this show that Tampa Bay is competitive, they're frisky, and if things go right for them, they could end up representing the NFC South in the playoffs by the end of the year. The Zach Wilson era for the New York Jets is over as the 4-6 Jets lost to the 6-5 Buffalo Bills 32-6. Let's talk about the Jets for a second. I don't necessarily agree with benching Zach Wilson here. Has Zach Wilson been amazing for the Jets? No, no, he hasn't. But as someone who has watched a lot of Jets football this season, I can pretty confidently say that Zach Wilson has been far from the furthest problem for this team. To me, I think the biggest problem for the Jets offense and why they're struggling so much is their offensive line. If you watched this game, you would constantly see linemen miss their blocks, defenders running free into the backfield, Zach Wilson constantly under pressure, running for his life, being forced to make throws that if he had just even a second more, he might not have made. It's really quite surprising to me that everyone seems to think that changing quarterbacks for the Jets is suddenly going to save their season because it's not. The Jets have systemic issues on their offensive line. Their wide receivers can't really separate outside of Garrett Wilson. The scheme is not great, to put it politely, for the New York Jets offense. And a single quarterback change, especially one that may not even be the right thing to do, is not going to suddenly make a Jets team, which was seen as a quarterback away, but realistically needed more help, uh, competitive. I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. As for the Bills, Josh Allen got back to his usual self. He threw for 275 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did have an interception, but he was dynamic throughout this game. James Cook continues to emerge 73 yards on the ground, 29 and a touchdown through the air. Khalil Shakir was the surprise breakout of this game for Buffalo. 3 receptions, 115 yards, and a touchdown. And as I mentioned before, that Buffalo defense was just dominating all game long. 2 interceptions, 6 sacks. Really, they gave Zach Wilson and the Jets quarterbacks no time to breathe. This type of game is what Buffalo needed to stay competitive in the AFC. They are a game and a half back from Miami for the division title. They are in position to potentially snag a wild card spot as well. And if they continue to play like this, there are going to be a dangerous team going into December and January. The Los Angeles Rams surprised pretty much everyone this week as they managed to beat the Seattle Seahawks 17-16 in quarterback Matthew Stafford's return to action. Stafford threw for 190 yards and touchdown as well as an interception. He did look a little gimpy throughout this game. He looked like he was still a little bit hurt. I expect that to improve in the coming weeks. Royce Freeman ran for 73 yards on the ground. Puka Nacua, 70 yards and a touchdown through the air. But the big story for the Rams here is that Cooper Kupp suffered an injury. He could miss the next couple games, which is not great for the Rams. They are a couple games back from the wild card right now. They are still trying to compete for this year. And ultimately, if they want to have any chance of making the playoffs and making some noise, they're going to need him. Otherwise, they may want to start looking towards 2024 and continuing to build up assets to compete in the future. For Seattle, this game was the last thing they needed. They fell to 6-4 out of first place in the NFC West, back into the wild card. Geno Smith was not great, 233 yards and a touchdown. And he also had an elbow injury in this game, something to monitor, especially because Seattle is going to be playing on Thanksgiving. So having him back would be really, really good for this team. And if he's out, they almost certainly lose to the San Francisco 49ers. Even so, Seattle does have a pretty good team. They have a good roster. I expect them to make the playoffs. But if they don't make it as the division winner in the NFC West, they may have to instead face a team like the Detroit Lions or the San Francisco 49ers in the wildcard round, which is not a great thing for them and for their Super Bowl hopes. On Sunday Night Football, the Denver Broncos surprised the nation when they ended up beating the Minnesota Vikings 21-20 in what was a thrilling game. Russell Wilson continues his resurgence this year. He threw for 259 yards and a touchdown. Samaje Perine had 60 yards on 7 receptions out of the running back position. Cortland Sutton, 4 receptions, 66 yards, and a touchdown. That is now his 8th touchdown on the year. He has been phenomenal for them at wide receiver. The defense has once again stepped up for Denver. An interception, 2 sacks, clutching up at the end. And really, it's surprising to see this Broncos team in this position. They were the team that lost to Miami, giving up 70 points. But ever since that loss, Denver has been 5-2. They are playing great football right now. And honestly, it's not inconceivable that they end up uh, making it to the playoffs if things go right for them. Of course, it's unlikely considering how tough the AFC is, but nothing's impossible. For Minnesota, this game was a bit of a disappointment. They moved to 6-5, but they are still firmly in the wild card in the NFC. Quarterback Joshua Dobbs had another great performance, 221 yards and touchdown to go along with the interception, 21 and a touchdown on the ground. Ty Chandler ran for 73 yards. Alexander Madison, 81 yards. And TJ Hawkinson, 4 receptions, 55 yards. The defense just was not able to do enough in the end for the Vikings, and they weren't able to stop Denver from marching down the field and kicking a last-second field goal to win it all. Make no mistake, Minnesota is still a really, really good team, but performances like this could end up hurting them in the long run. And these types of performances moving forward aren't really going to be acceptable for them, especially if they want to make serious noise in the playoffs, in the wild card round, and if they still have hopes for the division. Monday night's game early on looked to be a absolute rout as the Kansas City Chiefs went up 17-7 early on the Philadelphia Eagles. I had several heart attacks watching this game. It was terrible. I was having a horrible time. And then the second half happened, and Philadelphia managed to battle back. They ended up winning this game 21-17, moving to 9-1 on the season. Jalen Hurts was not great in this game. He admitted as much afterwards, but he did enough. He ran for 29 yards, 2 touchdowns, 150 yards in the air, and interception, but he made several clutch plays at the end. DeAndre Swift was fine on the ground, 76 yards and a touchdown. 3 receptions, 31 yards in the air. Devonta Smith, 6 receptions, 99 yards. He really stepped up. And the defense was not great in interception, sack, but they did enough and really clamped down in the second half when they needed to. This Eagles team just finds ways to win. They're really good. I'm really excited to see them in the future and in the playoffs, and hopefully they win a Super Bowl. For Kansas City, they fall to 7-3. Has to be frustrating for quarterback Patrick Mahomes. He had 177 yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception. He also had several balls dropped, including a possible game-winning touchdown. Uh, he also had 6 carries for 38 yards on the ground. Isaiah Pacheco was great, 89 yards on the ground. Wasn't enough in the end. Justin Watson, 5 receptions, 53 yards and a touchdown. Rashee Rice, 4 receptions for 42 yards. Travis Kelce, 7 receptions, 44 yards and a touchdown. The Kansas City Chiefs defense, the interception, 5 sacks. Great effort by them. But ultimately, it wasn't enough. And the problems that plagued the Chiefs throughout this season continue to do so. The wide receivers have not been stepping up when they needed to. The team has been struggling to score in the second half. And ultimately, it's going to hurt them against good teams like it did against Philadelphia. Of course, that doesn't mean that Kansas City is not going to make the playoffs, but they might not have quite as easy of a time playing the playoff caliber teams in the AFC this year that they have had in years past. Thank you so much for watching this week's NFL breakdown. If you liked what you saw, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. Have a great Thanksgiving holiday, everybody, and we'll catch you in the next one.